Hello and welcome to Sparks. I'm Deirdre Brennan. I'm the Executive Director of Rails, the Reaching Across Illinois Library System. And we started this podcast to provoke and enable conversation about library trends and issues and just things of general interest to our library listeners and others. This is the 38th episode, and today I'm talking to Monica Harris, who is the Associate Executive Director at Rails. Welcome, Monica. Thanks for joining us today. And we're going to talk about our strategic plan. And Monica was the person who led the development of the plan. And so she has lots of things to tell us about it. And I think people who are listening, definitely some of the people who are listening know how much I value strategic plans. In a previous podcast with Stephanie Chase, we had a very pretty passionate conversation actually about strategic planning, and I'm sure that will come through today as well. So yeah. Anyway, so I guess speaking of, Stephanie and the process and everything, maybe you could start off, Monica, by just talking about why we decided to use a consultant to do the plan this time.
Absolutely. So, Rails just celebrated its 10th year in 2021, which is really exciting. The very first strategic plan was also developed by a consultant, and then Rails used a revision of the strategic plan to do in-house, which I think is a really interesting model. I wasn't at Rails at the time when those decisions were made, but I think you get so much value from working with a consultant in terms of them having an outside perspective and sort of a neutral eye. And I think what that really allows for is the facilitation, a good facilitation of discussions with, in our case, Rails members, to really hear from them and really, since we really wanted a member-led process where we really took a lot of different viewpoints into account and could synthesize them, using a dedicated, experienced outside consultant allowed us to do that in a way that could hopefully get the best and most honest and authentic possible answers from our members, so that when we were developing a plan, we were developing one that was really, what they were coming from. And plus, it's great to work with an expert, somebody who is really focused on what's happening right now in strategic plans, the best things that they can use, the tools that they know how to do. And so it was a good opportunity for us to look at something in a fresh way, 10 years in, and to use somebody who was new to Rails and who could offer a new perspective, I think.
Right. And we also, given that all the change that's happened in the past few years, I think as you say, the last time we did our plan, we did it in-house, and it was really just an update. We certainly learned, new things from members. I remember specifically about the new sort of growing concern about safety in the library. But, this time it was really, it seemed like a really important time to just sort of re-envision everything.
I was just going to say, it's such a good point, like that, right, about how much things have changed, because I think in addition to all of the normal changes you would see over any 10-year period, which are huge, we had the pandemic happen. And that was really, in a lot of ways, an interesting opportunity to be able to hear where people are going and what new things they were going to need and want from Rails in a way that was sort of a really interesting experience, which hopefully we'll talk more about as we go.
Right. So the consultant we used was Constructive Disruption. Do you want to just say a bit about why we picked them? Because we did look around a bit, and there are a lot of people out there doing a good job.
And that is, I think, a good thing for libraries who are looking for strategic planning consultants to know is there's so many people out there who are really fantastic and do great work. I think the key part is finding someone whose vision really aligns with your own in terms of what kind of plan you want to create, as well as the process that you want. I think one thing that we knew from the very beginning is that because of the uncertainty of the pandemic, again, we wanted somebody who felt really comfortable with virtual tools was one thing. So somebody who was going to be able to be comfortable facilitating Zoom meetings and using innovative virtual tools in order to make those conversations happen. And that was one thing that constructive disruption had a lot of experience with. And another piece that was really important to us was somebody who not only understood the library world, which is huge, but somebody who also understands systems, which can be a little bit different for a strategic planning consultant. And constructive disruption had also had experience with their work on the Massachusetts plan for a system that we thought would translate well to Rails.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And they also have both Stephanie Chase and Cindy Fessemeyer actually have professional
Right.
experience in non-public library settings. So
Right.
that was especially important, I think, because, we're not a public library, we're not a
Exactly.
library, and we serve all types of libraries. So, the process, as I recall, it took about 6 months. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, just about.
It was pretty fast. So you want to talk about the steps, along the way, and, how the members were involved and the board also?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different steps in the process. And this was another area where the consultants came in really handy because they kind of came in with a sample timeline for us to consider. And that really gave us an idea of like the framework that we needed to build from. But one of the really important things that we wanted to be able to do was to introduce very early on in the process. So we started in about June of 2021 with the consultants and beginning that process. And we needed to be able to introduce the staff and the board to the process very early because we really wanted their input. And so we started off with a big staff meeting where we really, kind of introduced the concept of the process, talked about what that would entail, and talked about the timeline and how it would move forward. Just so the staff knew that their viewpoints were really valued and that we really wanted to make sure that they had a sense that they had ownership of this plan. And so we started really with them and the board. The board also started on very early in July. We did a big orientation process for our board. For new board members coming on board, but Cindy Fessemeyer, who is based in Wisconsin, was actually able to come to that day. And it was a really great chance for Cindy and Constructive Disruption to get to really understand Rails through that board orientation process, and for the board to really hear a little bit more about what the strategic planning process would be like. So we really got everybody kind of introduced very early on right away. The other part that we did very early on was put together a steering committee of people who were really going to be focused on the plan. That was both really exciting and challenging because we put out a call for interest in the steering committee and got a lot of interest from really fantastic Rails members who wanted to be a part of that process. But we also needed to have a group that included Rails staff, Rails board, and Rails members. And it was really important to us that we had representation from Rails members of all types, and also had good representation geographically from all over our very diverse service area. And so we had to really be able to get together a group of people who could represent all of those things and then also agree to do this monumental amount of work that we needed them to do over a 6-month period. So we're really grateful for that group to kind of come all together. Once that happened, then we moved into a lot more processes with our members. So that's when we started updating at our Rails member update. I think that was in September of 2021. Stephanie came and gave a big overview of the process and started to ask some questions of the membership. We started to schedule our town halls, our member town halls and our staff town halls for September and October. We did 2 staff town halls and 4 member town halls in our first round. And it was really important to us to schedule those at all different times so that we could hopefully get as many members as possible involved. So we did an evening session so that we could hopefully grab more school librarians and trustees who might not be available during daytime hours. We tried to make as many of those opportunities available because they were 2-hour-long sessions. They're quite intensive in terms of the conversation and the questions that we were asking of people. And so thankfully, we got a lot of people attending those. When it came to our town hall and member update sessions, we had over 650 members contribute to that process, which really meant we really had a robust piece of material in order to draw from. And that was just in that first round, we did that. We also did a series of focus groups. So we did focus groups with smaller groups of 8 to 10 librarians that were focused on very specific library types in the Rails membership. So we had one for school libraries, one for academic libraries, and one for special libraries, where they could really all put their own perspectives in terms of how Rails could best serve their library types, because we really value, of course, all of our members, including our public library members, but we do tend to get a lot of participation from our public library members at things like our town halls. So it was really just a chance for us to make sure that we were getting as wide of a viewpoint as possible when it came to how we were getting our information. And then beyond that, we did another series of town halls with our members and did one-on-one interviews with some of our important partners. So we did one-on-one interviews with the Illinois Library Association, with the Illinois Heartland Library System, and with the Illinois State Library. And they were really able to give great perspective as partners for how Rails supports what their needs and their mission is, as well as what they're hoping that Rails would be able to do into the future. So a really robust series of events. Yeah. That I probably left some things out of that list, but it was really, though it was a long process and a lot of time, I think really resulted in a huge amount of information that we were able to use to develop a good plan.
Yes, it was, as you say, very robust, and I think really gave members, a lot of different kinds of opportunities to give feedback. It was actually quite interesting to see the various tools that they used. I think in some ways the virtual sharing of information was more effective than than in person, because it was just so fast in terms of the, some of the tools and how the data got analyzed right before your eyes, the different polls that they would use. It was really kind of fun.
I know. Yeah. I was thinking about that, like how when we first started this process, I was really thinking of the virtual nature, because all of these programs that I just mentioned were all done virtually. Right. That I was concerned that would be a less successful or robust process, when in fact, I think it really allowed for new tools, because people could actually in real time, add right. revisions to wording. People could add Post-its with some of the Padlet and Jamboard tools that were used. And that real-time polling, as you mentioned, meant we could ask a question, really get a sense of the room right there in terms of how people were feeling, and move quickly through some of these prompts in a way that I haven't experienced in similar kind of in-person events.
So let's talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about multi-type, the different kinds of libraries, already before, but let's talk a little bit about what the new plan, now that we have it, does for the different types of libraries. I think, one of the things that I think is interesting is this, this sense that we found out about, that non-public library members think that we don't understand their needs as well as we could. And that really hit home to me, because that's something that if you don't understand, what somebody needs, you can't serve them, right? So can you talk about what's in the plan related to that?
Yeah, and I think so I've been with Rails for about 2 years, and I will say one of my big takeaways in starting with Rails was really this understanding that the staff were really focused on a multi-type environment, really focused on trying to make sure that everything spoke to every member. But what was really interesting about the strategic planning process was hearing directly from members that they still feel like there's more work to be done, and that there's more ways to continue to improve that process. And I think that was something that everybody really took to heart through that process. We heard it from a couple of different spaces. And so in terms of the crafting of the plan, I think people will find, as they're reading through the actual objectives and measures, every single one applies to every single type of library that Rails serves. And I think that was done very intentionally, so that we would really note that this was a priority for Rails. I think objectives 3 and 4 in particular really speak to trying to make sure that it is a priority for Rails, that we understand that we need to meet the needs of every type of Rails member, independent of type, geography, budget, any
Right.
of those, items, but also that we need to learn more about how members perceive the inequities that they're seeing, because that's the only way
Exactly.
that we can help to address it. So definitely took that to heart. It was definitely, we were grateful that people were honest about that in those focus groups, and were willing to share their perspectives so that we could respond to that. I think that was of huge value.
Yes, and that's a real priority for me
Yep,
because, as I said earlier, if you don't understand what a library needs, you can't help them. And
absolutely.
this, and I think, part of it is certainly our own, how we, send information out, how we communicate. And, I think that we'll learn about that as well as we learn more about what these particular perceptions are,
Yeah.
by libraries. So you cited a couple of goals. I think that one of the goals that is specifically about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and
Yes.
libraries really wanting us to, model best practice, provide leadership, and we were not at all surprised to hear that,
Right.
but very gratified that work that we're doing on that is being recognized, and that libraries really want and need us to do that so that we can all have an impact on, our industry and our society, actually.
Yeah. Well, and that was one that was very interesting, because that came clearly, like loud and clear from the members, that this was a priority that they had for Rails. But they also suggested some different kinds of ways for us to focus in on those goals, including adding accessibility specifically to the goal. So in addition to equity, diversity, and inclusion, making sure that accessibility was also highlighted, which is always been a concern for many libraries, but is a growing concern in terms of how they plan their buildings, how they plan their programming, what materials they're getting. So it was another value in terms of that second goal that we'll continue to move forward and find ways to provide best practice.
So I know the staff is excited about the goals, the Rails staff, I mean, but I have to say that my particular favorite thing is the new mission statement. It just is so, we connect libraries.
Yeah.
And which just like sums it up in a few words, and it's going to be great on a t-shirt, that's for sure. But I think, really it does explain very succinctly and very succinctly exactly what Rails does in so many ways and every day. So I love that about it. And we've heard great things about that from the board. It was actually the board, I think, who came up with it, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It came straight out of a board brainstorming session.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what are some of your favorite things about the plan?
I mean, you took my mission and mission one only for some of those same reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that the reasons that I love the mission and vision statement also apply to the plan, which is that they're clear and that they're succinct and easy to understand. And it really helps people to understand what an organization that is truly as complex as Rails and does so many different things, being able to put that into a 1 or 2 page document that everybody can read through and understand the pieces that are there, is an exciting opportunity, I think. Because we do hear from people who don't really understand Rails's focus and priorities and what Rails does. So that part of it is also really exciting to me, for some of those same reasons.
So what have you heard from members about it? Have people given you feedback?
Well, we did. We had a board committee meeting with our resource sharing committee earlier this week. And one of the things we did as part of that meeting was to go through the new plan and get comments on it from that board committee and hear what they were thinking. And I will say one thing that I was really gratified by was hearing from a member who's a special librarian and one who's a school librarian, really saying that the things that were highlighted here are big concerns for them, and that they were really glad to see those things highlighted and mentioned in the plan. So because we worked so hard to do that, just hearing that unprompted was like really made me happy. It was it was really thrilling for us. But I think people are really excited also just about the process of what is possible right now. And they were really reflecting that through the eyes of the strategic plan. So that group in particular is very interested in trying to find ways to move forward services for the unserved, for example. So seeing that as a specific goal that was listed and finding a way to work that into the plan and really try to make something happen over the next 3 years in that process was something that they were really excited about. And so I think a strategic plan in many ways is also about finding things for people to jump onto and get excited about and move them forward. So I think in that way, it was also great to me that people found things like that in the plan and wanted to work on them, on behalf and with Rails.
So what advice do you have for libraries that are, thinking about doing this and thinking, oh boy, I don't know if we can do this. It seems like so much work. What would you tell them?
One thing I would say is something we did touch on a little earlier, which is I think you can consider the pandemic a possible strength. I know it seems strange, but it really did give an opportunity for a lot of people in your communities to get comfortable with virtual and digital tools that they may not have been pre-pandemic. So it's really possible to do some things that you may not have been able to do before in terms of getting people in the door and having them listen to your messaging and make that happen. So offering a mix, if you can, of in-person and virtual means that you might get different responses and different people than you normally would have in this process before. I think that you can also do what you can to build really rich, guided conversations with open-ended questions in your process. Community surveys are great, and I think that they can get a lot of great information. But if you can build in opportunities for small groups to discuss big things, you may hear things that you weren't even thinking about in terms of a community survey. And I think that was one thing we really learned from this process is it gave us real direction and priority when we were able to hear what people thought mattered to them that didn't come from a specific question. So that was really interesting to hear. And the only other thing that I would say is if you're considering building an advisory committee, which is what we ended up doing with our steering committee, see if you can have an opportunity to have a mix of staff, board, and community members of some type all in one space, because they're all going to come with different perspectives. And I think sometimes that results in a really creative and innovative plan. We had a really good experience with our steering committee. And I think in part that was because of the diversity of viewpoints that came around Rails. And that was a really great chance for us to work through that. So those are my big takeaways, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I would say, to our libraries and our listeners that, we had the ability, financial wherewithal, whatever, to hire a consultant. But there are many different ways of doing a strategic plan. There are many different levels of complexity, et cetera. Monica, I, others at Rails would be happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk about doing a strategic plan. And because I think it is just so important for understanding your community and for understanding where you need to go in order to serve the community appropriately. I would also say that I don't think there is a better marketing tool or communications tool than a strategic plan.
Yeah.
Because it is a project where you talk about the library and you ask the community to talk about the library. And as with us, people found, people had never read our strategic plan. Well, everybody who's involved in this strategic plan has read this strategic plan because they had to. Yep. So it's like automatically people learn about the library and see the library in new ways. And, that is like, free advertising in a sense. There is nothing that you can do to better, promote your library in your community than to do a strategic planning process.
It's true. Yeah. It is unexpected silver lining in some ways.
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So anything else you want to share, Monica, before we sign off?
I thought I would just in case people are interested in a little bit about next steps. So we are going to be working to build out an action plan with our staff. So that'll be things that are really specific goals that we'll have to meet the needs of those objectives and goals. And And that will be in coordination later in the year with some of our other annual reporting that we do. And in that, we will also be building more into a measurement and metric phase, because a lot of people at this point are very interested in very specific ways to measure those goals. So that's all going to be part of our process, and we'll be reporting on that to our Rails board. So if you want to follow the progress of that plan, there's going to be lots of ways to do that. So I just want to let you know, this is not the last you'll hear of the plan. There'll be lots of chances over the next 3 years to hear how we're going to have the opportunity to move that forward. And as Dee said, if you have any questions about our plan or about strategic planning in general, since we've just been through this process, just want to encourage all of our Rails members to reach out. We have some great resources and some great chances to talk to you about this. It's just been such a positive experience, and we would hope to be able to share that with you and your libraries as you move forward on these processes.
Exactly. Yes. Well, thanks, Monica. And of course, the plan is on our website, and you'll continue to hear about it because it's really important to us and to all of you. So thanks very much for joining us today and talking about the plan.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for listening to Sparks today. Sparks is produced by the Reaching Across Illinois Library System. If you would like to learn more about the show or share your feedback on the topics discussed, please visit railslibraries.info/sparks.